Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this session titled Global Disorders, Who Leads, Who Follows, and Who Falls. My name is Julien Touré. I'm very pleased to be your moderator for another session that promises to be very interesting, even if it will be one of the shortest of this MEDays 2025. Since the end of the Second World War, the international system has been built through a multitude of organizations created to promote peace and cooperation between states. The end of the Cold War represented the hope for a united international order where power relations were no longer so direct. However, today, these institutions like the UN, the IAEA, the WTO, and so on, are being challenged, and power relations are intensifying, relegating international rules and laws in the background, or completely denying or violating them. In a world where crises follow one another, traditional international organizations are struggling to resolve these issues. This growing inability of international organizations to influence disputes is pushing states to resort to bilateral or regional agreements rather than multilateralism. In this context, new forms of organization and cooperation are emerging. For instance, the expansion of the BRICS in 2024 to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, Egypt, the United Arab Emirates, and Ethiopia illustrates the rise of a bloc challenging Western hegemony. The integration of the African Union into the G20 in 2023 demonstrates the desire of southern countries to have a greater influence on global decisions. We are also seeing forms of sectoral cooperation, bringing together states around a specific area to organize joint projects, such as the West African Power Pool. Other security alliances, such as AUKUS and Quad, are heightening tensions between states by increasing the American presence in the Indo-Pacific region to counter China. So, do international organizations still carry weight, or have they become obsolete due to their divisions and inefficiency? Who benefits for a new, reformed alliance and more acute relation and maybe tensions between great power? Who, in other words, benefit from the emerging new global order? Who falls behind in this new global order? Who will follow some leader? Who will fail to follow? That's some of the questions we will try to address this afternoon. To do so, I'm very pleased to introduce to you our distinguished panelists. First, Général à la retraite, Michel Yakovlev, enseignant à l'École d'affaires internationales de Sciences Po Paris. Ellen Bass Lipson, Fellow and President Emeritus of the Stimson Center in Washington, D.C. Xavier Titelman, CEO of the Next Aviation. Dr. Anna Widen, Associate Research Fellow at the Swedish Institute of International Affairs. You have some fans here. Jean-Christophe, Vice-Président de l'Aspen Institut France. Niklas Svanström, Director of the Institute for Security and Development Policy based in Stockholm. And Volker Peter, Senior Distinguished Fellow at the German Institute for International and Security Affairs. Since the title of this session was quite interesting, I will start our discussion with a very, very easy question. In this new global environment, who leads, who follows, and who falls? I hope we'll go directly to the key points of our discussions. Monsieur Yakovlev, if you want to start our discussion on the topic.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all. Who leads, who follows, who falls? In short, in the current situation, everyone loses. If we remember during the COVID, that was a few years ago, the world kind of stopped. Most of us, we were stopped in our houses, basically. And I think we all expected, after the end of COVID, when we would gradually reopen, that we would reopen, the world would reopen and re-establish its circulation of ideas, persons, and trade, with a feeling of optimism, today is a new day. And it crashed in February 22. And now the world is in flux, and there is massive reorganization or disorganization, mostly under transgressive countries or leaders, the first of which are President Putin of Russia and President Trump of the United States. So currently, we all are losers. It's not only Ukraine who's losers. Russia is losing tremendously. America is backsliding and losing a lot. Europe is losing massively because we are receding in the world order. China looks like a victor. In my eyes, they are a loser also. And in Africa, in the current situation, Africa is very dependent on the global state of affairs, and the situation of flux today is not conducive to the advantages of basically any nation in Africa. My only hope for the future after this very bleak picture is that in terms of reorganization, we are going to see new alignments. There's lots of talk about the global south. I'm not a great believer in the concept because the global south may be global, but it's not coherent. Many nations, Brazil, South Africa, India, Morocco, Egypt, consider themselves part of the global south. In practice, their main agreement is that the old order was not to their advantage, but they don't agree much on how to create a new order. So my hope is that in this current situation of chaos, we will have voices of reason coming from the global south to create a coherent south. It's time for all these nations to stop being victims of the wars between the West and the East, and in the current circumstances. Currently, you are collateral victims. I hope that the global south will become more coherent, and to a certain degree that it will tell the big guys in the north to stop playing stupid with this planet. And by the way, it's not only war, it's climate change, environmental degradation. Because as we've seen with the war going on now, there are a number of wars all over the place, but the war in Ukraine has definitely put a stop to all serious international efforts against environmental degradation, because there's limited bandwidth for political masters. There's the notion that today it's urgent, countries are at war, we'll deal with those long-term issues later. The first victims of environmental degradation are in Africa and Latin America. I do hope that, in order to conclude, I do hope that the new order will be inspired by the global south, and that means that the global south has got to find coherence beyond recrimination against the global north, to find your own reasons to operate and collaborate together and then to teach a few lessons on the masters of the old world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Yakovlev. Ms. Leibson, the floor is to you.
Thank you, Julian. So the way the question is framed, the who sounds like a person, right? It sounds like an individual. So I think there is an interesting question of, is leadership in the world determined by these powerful individuals, these names that we keep hearing? Sometimes they only represent the territory of a state. Sometimes they represent something larger than that. But I assume your question is still based on the assumption that the international system works with the geographic territories of states as the unit that we're looking at. The unit, is it the state that wins? Is it the state that loses? So it raises to me an interesting question of, and it plays very much to what our previous speaker just said, are there new ways to think about what are the attributes of successful states versus states that are likely to struggle and have trouble adapting in the 21st century, which so far has proven to be a very violent century. A violent century and a century of eroding functioning institutions. So in the past, we've always thought that military power was the kind of most appropriate or logical metric of what states are strong, what states can control their territory and could even project power beyond their borders. But then we eventually started adding additional categories that measure which states are likely to be winners. Certainly economic performance, connectivity. There used to be a globalization index of measuring what percent of a society had access to the internet and what was the level of connectivity in the global system. Now we would add cyber and new technologies. Small Estonia has a reputation for punching above its weight in cyber technologies. And I want to add climate change as another metric of what states succeed or fail. So we have to sometimes step away from the immediate environment of war and peace, who's up, who's down, who's winning, is it Ukraine, is it Russia, who is prevailing on the battlefield, and take a longer term view of what are the attributes of successful states. And to your point about countries of the global south, look how much Morocco is doing on green energy. You know, states can find strength in what are their economic advantages, their environmental advantages, their political advantages, and they can compete successfully for the welfare of their people. So I start with the premise that yes, the world is a messy and chaotic and dangerous place right now, but we should maybe take a fresh look at how we measure what are the characteristics that contribute to which states succeed and which do not. Thanks.
Thank you very much for Thanks for broadening our perspective on how we understand maybe the concept of power too, and how states need to act regarding major issues. Mr. Titelman, my next question in the line with the general question we have here. You've recently been quite a few times on the ground in Ukraine, and you probably have a particular acute point of view on who win, who lose in the current chaotic world order.
Well, of course, in Ukraine, everybody loses. Europe loses. Russia is not managing to have great success, so they don't manage to invade Ukraine and to take Ukraine as they promised. They took only 1% of Ukraine in the last 1,000 days. They need 80 more years to conquer Ukraine at the current speed, with losing 1 million men on the last 3 years. So it's amazing numbers, and of course it's not sustainable for them. Russia will be weaker on geopolitically speaking, economically speaking, demographically speaking. It's not a good thing for them. Of course, Europe lost a lot, because we had an access and a good partnership with our neighbors. France has a good partnership with Spain, Italy, and Belgium. We had pretty good partnership with Russia. We were buying them gas, etc. So we are losing also. And basically, I think those countries are enjoying chaos. They are benefiting from chaos. And we see that in Africa, for example, and Russia, and China, and Turkey, for example, are countries that manage to create chaos and then took advantage of it. For example, if you look at Sudan, Sudan is a pretty good example in my opinion, because you have Russia, who still kept selling weapons to a country where it's forbidden by the law, by the UNO. They kept having relation with this country, and they started to support a local general where they wanted to mine gold, to have more money with gold. And they supported so much this general that he started to make some kind of a rebellion. And so Russia started supporting that general and getting paid by gold. So they made money more than before. They stopped paying tax to the official government, and on the same time they were discussing with the official Sudanese government to have a reduction of the cost of their position to create an harbor on the Red Sea. It means that they are selling weapons to both sides, enjoying more money than before, selling more weapons than before, and that's what they are doing everywhere. China is doing the same in Rwanda against République du Congo, African Republic. And Turkey is doing the same, supporting both countries. And the consequence, of course, is that local communities suffer much more than before. It's obvious, Europe is losing position also. But finally, what's important for us is it safe on the long term? And of course, the weaker those countries will be, the more chaotic will be the world. And we also know, for example, that Russia is organizing immigration. Wagner is organizing immigration from Iraq up to the Poland border. They are offering the crossing of the Mediterranean Sea from Libya up to Italy. And you have so many examples where they use all this capability to destroy the world, to weaken Europe, and to make more money. And unfortunately, now, of course, it's not a success for Russia, but the losses are much worse for the local Africa and for Europe now.
Thank you very much, Mr. Titelman. You've just pointed out that some countries seem to enjoy and certainly gain from the current chaos. Ms. Faden, what would be your take on that? Do you believe that some countries enjoy chaos?
Well, I think, first of all, when we talk about who leads, it's also a question of believing and having confidence and trust in the kind of power that leads. And I'm going to talk about, address your question from the perspective of my expertise, having studied the Saudi-US relations for quite some time. And it's pretty clear that the Saudis, while they're going to Washington and it's a lot of opulence, and it's a lot of fast, and it's a lot of good words and backslapping and so on, the Saudis do not trust the United States anymore. So it's a problem for them, but it's also an opportunity. It's been an opportunity for them to develop a much more assertive foreign policy, to also have ad hoc alliances and alliances, de facto alliances with other countries, business deals and military defense deals with China, business deals with China, contacts with Russia, while they also still, of course, are reliant on the United States. But here's the thing with powers such as Saudi Arabia, and here we can also talk about the climate meeting that took place in Belém very recently. So the Saudis, they do need a lot of money, and they do need to produce a lot of oil. and kind of use that very diligently and intelligently to actually inject money into their economy, to grow a different economy. And their geopolitical stance is all about that. So it's about using this to really create new kind of business opportunities, new alliances, new strategic partners, and they're doing that, and Washington knows that, but I don't think that Washington kind of understands how independent and how assertive they actually can be. So I think that states, middle powers like Saudi Arabia, but who are building a kind of soft power in the Middle East in different ways, they are in a lot of ways benefiting from this situation, also because of the authoritarian kind of states that they're dealing with, and they're decreasing the importance of democratic kind of capital. So I think it's interesting. What's happening in Saudi Arabia is interesting, but from the point of view of Washington, it's kind of a loss in a way, I would say. Yeah, I end with that.
Thank you very much. Mr. Ba, after World War II, the US created a rule-based order and largely gained from it. But the current administration seems keen to destroy it and thus increase chaos. Do you think that the world is stuck with this new reality in the long term? And if yes, how can we adapt to this fundamental change on the international stage?
Si vous me permettez, je vais parler en français. Je voudrais, en réponse à votre question, mais aussi par rapport à ce qui a été dit jusqu'à maintenant, je crois souligner le fait qu'il y a une sorte de consensus pour dire qu'il n'y a pas de gagnants, il y a surtout des perdants, ou il n'y a quasiment que des perdants. Peut-être qu'on peut même aller un peu plus loin, et je voudrais utiliser une image très forte, à mon avis, qui a été mise en exergue par un auteur qui s'appelle Amin Malouf, auteur d'origine libanaise, qui a illustré l'état du monde aujourd'hui, ou comparé l'état du monde à celui d'un labyrinthe. Et il a sorti un livre extraordinaire il y a à peu près un an qui s'appelle Le labyrinthe des égarés. Je crois qu'il montre très bien effectivement l'état dans lequel le monde se trouve aujourd'hui, une sorte d'égarement généralisé, ou de ce qu'il appelle aussi l'épuisement du monde. Et dans cet épuisement du monde, je crois qu'il est très clair que ni les forces ascendantes ni les forces descendantes, qui restent d'ailleurs à définir, ne sont en mesure d'imposer leur point de vue. Je crois qu'il y a une espèce de, de zero-sum game où personne ne parvient à l'emporter et que, au bout du compte, il faut rendre à l'évidence qu'il n'y a certainement pas besoin, et il serait certainement très préjudiciable, de vouloir bâtir ou rebâtir un ordre mondial avec un hégémone. Je crois que la notion d'hégémonie, par l'un ou par l'autre, n'est voulue par personne. Il a été évoqué très en détail le Global South ou le monde occidental qui lui-même est en train de s'éclater. Je pense qu'il n'est de l'intérêt de personne, sauf éventuellement effectivement d'un hégémone qui voudra s'imposer, mais je pense que si on veut garantir ce qui était le contrat initial d'il y a 80 ans et de revenir un petit peu à l'esprit de la charte de San Francisco, donc de la charte des Nations Unies, il y a une nécessité peut-être d'arriver à inventer, et de ce point de vue-là, je trouve que le Reinventing the Global Equation est parfaitement, effectivement, illustre parfaitement ce à quoi nous sommes aujourd'hui confrontés, quel est le défi collectif pour sortir de ce labyrinthe, parce que sinon nous allons tous nous épuiser et nous anéantir dans un labyrinthe dont personne ne trouvera la sortie. Et donc, ça veut dire aussi qu'il y a des efforts de part et d'autre à réaliser. Et je pense que notamment, nous devons, et je dirais, je fais partie, j'ai passé beaucoup de temps aux Nations Unies, à la Banque mondiale, dans un certain nombre de grandes organisations internationales, je pense que nous devons reconnaître un certain nombre d'erreurs qui ont été commises et qui ont fait que, depuis 10, 15 ou 20 ans, ces institutions ont été vues comme étant des outils d'une domination occidentale ou d'un modèle ou d'un mode de pensée occidental, où on a effectivement refusé d'envisager un certain nombre de réformes, de gouvernance pour effectivement faire en sorte que l'état du monde, de la démographie, de l'économie mondiale puisse être reflété dans ces institutions internationales. On a également probablement laissé ces institutions sans mettre une responsabilité très forte. Et quand on voit aujourd'hui qu'après des centaines et des centaines de milliards de dollars dans ce qu'on appelle l'aide publique au développement, il y a encore aujourd'hui plus de 40% de la population africaine qui n'a pas accès à l'électricité, ça montre qu'effectivement il y a quand même eu des défaillances. Et donc je pense que nous devons effectivement de reconnaître aujourd'hui qu'il y a eu des faiblesses et que nous devons effectivement les reconnaître et travailler dessus. Alors, juste un dernier point, pour dire que, effectivement, aujourd'hui, on est dans une sorte de disruption dégénéralisée, où, peut-être même pour aller un peu plus loin, et peut-être espérer qu'il y ait ce phénomène de ce qu'on appelle la destruction créatrice, et que dans cette espèce de destruction ou de démantèlement complet auquel nous assistons depuis 2 ou 3 ans, justement de l'esprit de la charte de San Francisco, c'est-à-dire de principes fondamentaux, c'est-à-dire de l'intégrité territoriale et des principes de coopération internationale, eh bien on voit apparaître progressivement un certain nombre justement de cette destruction créatrice, c'est-à-dire que au-dessous du radar, on voit beaucoup de phénomènes de coopération internationale qui sont en train de se mettre en œuvre d'une nature complètement différente et qui associent notamment les gouvernements, le secteur privé, la société civile, qui sont des phénomènes que l'on ne voyait pas jusqu'à maintenant et que face à cette espèce d'impasse ou de labyrinthe dans lequel la coopération internationale s'est égarée, eh bien, on voit apparaître progressivement, parce qu'il faut quand même avoir un petit peu d'optimisme dans cette discussion, on voit apparaître des nouveaux mécanismes de coopération internationale sur toute une série de sujets très importants et qui touchent notamment les questions environnementales, mais également d'autres sujets, et je pense que ça c'est un élément qui est très positif.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Ba. Mr. Sundström, if we take for granted that the world is now a maze, how do you think we can find an exit to it?
Well, unfortunately, I do share the skepticism among many of the speakers here. Finding an exit to this will be tremendously difficult. I think we're going to look at unilaterals. I think where you're going to find this coalition of the willing, where we're trying to collaborate. I do think, for example, that Europe will collaborate much more with China because of the United States, and especially if now the United States will recognize the Russian occupation of Ukraine, or at least some of the borders. When it comes to green technology, we will see more collaboration with China as well. So I think the world will be much more transactional. And hopefully then, if you're going to look at this positively, these unilaterals can then extend into a larger scheme. So for the audience here, I do hope that Europe and Africa will collaborate much more. I see more collaboration with Canada, Australia, South Korea, Japan, in certain fields. But I would like to point out there are winners in this game. Maybe not the winners we would like to see. We see a fragmented economic system, competing economic systems. We see weakened international norms and regulations. And countries like DPRK, formerly known as North Korea, they have benefited immensely from this, because the sanctions regime is non-existent today. Before we had a SWIFT system that we can control DPRK. Now we have competing Russian and Chinese systems they can use. The trade DPRK had with China amounted to 95 to 98% of the trade. Today, the Russian trade with DPRK is at least 10 times, possibly up to 30 times as big. So this fragmentation and this instability benefits states that maybe is more in the corners of society, who is more sanctioned, who is more exposed. And just look at when we talk about cyber and cyber currencies and all that. The lack of norms and structure has enabled the North Korean government to massively benefit on currency theft. And we don't know how big it is, because most of the countries refuse to admit that they have lost so much financial goods to DPRK. So when you look in from their point of view, they are truly winners. So but if you look at people who are more into international trade, engagement, cooperation, democracy, absolutely, there we have the losers. And I think when we're looking for an exit and solution here, we have to be aware that there are actors that is not interested in finding an exit. And Russia being one of them, and a lot of countries that has been sanctioned by United States, Europe, United Nations, etc. Disruptive countries, they have no intention of letting this happen. So I'm pessimistic, but unilaterals is the first step. And then hopefully we can build extensive and more broader structures over time. But unfortunately, I think we're looking at a very much a barter trade in international politics more and more. So, which is making us all losers, or making most of us losers, I should say. Sorry for being pessimistic.
Thank you very much. Maybe to continue on this topic, Mr. Pertes. Earlier, Mr. Ba mentioned the necessity to reinvent the global equation. What do you think the key elements, the key components of this new equation should be?
Yeah, thank you very much. I guess I can continue with much that has been said, but I would not like to continue in the pessimism which my neighbor expressed, not because I think you're totally wrong, but because I think we cannot afford it. As policy advisors, as intellectuals who try to develop ideas for policymakers, if I tell a minister or the Secretary General of the United Nations, look, it's going down the drain anyway, don't bother, that's not good advice. So we have to come up with some ideas how we can make things better, and if it is only a millimeter. Now, therefore I would like to start and say, we still have the UN Charter. It's valid international law. And the great majority of the countries in the world and the people of the world have an interest that this charter and its provisions are maintained. When we speak of states, think about the inviolability of borders. Think about the territorial integrity of states. Think about the very, very important principle, the sovereign equality of states, which means that any state, whether big or small, has the same rights of sovereignty. Now, we have a few great powers who are violating these rights, who are violating the rules, but the great majority of states and of people have an interest in preserving that, and we should make that clear. We together, Africa and Europe, only Africa and Europe, we are almost half of the United Nations. Add Latin America, add the ASEAN states, the Southeast Asian state, and it's more than a two-thirds majority of states in the United Nations who have an interest in preserving the rules. So we have to find ways to neutralize those big powers and some of the regional big powers who are violating these rules. I was very happy that Sudan was already mentioned. I was a UN representative, the representative Secretary General in Sudan. We actually cooperated very well with the African Union, a good Moroccan diplomat who represented the African Union in Sudan. We tried to prevent the war from happening. But there were a couple of regional and international great powers who, to say it politely, did not help us at all. So, United Nations, but also the African Union, were politically marginalized when it came to conflict resolution or conflict prevention. We see the same happening in Palestine. The last panel, we heard about that. The United Nations has been politically marginalized there. It's now the US building a trusteeship board of peace, whatever. So it's a one-man show with some support. The UN should be there. It shouldn't be a one-man show of a US president, regardless of who he is, or whether we like him or we don't like him so much. So, can we rebuild multilateralism, international institutions, the United Nations, to make them more effective? It is difficult, no doubt, as long as the Security Council is being blocked by great power conflicts. And still, I would say, there is no alternative to that. We won't get the radical reform which we need. It's a scandal that no African country has a permanent seat on the Security Council. It's a scandal that the demographically biggest country in the world, India, has no permanent seat on the Security Council. But we will not get these reforms because the powers that be, some of the permanent members that are in the Council now, will block any serious reform of the Security Council. But there are other things that can be done. We, the majority of countries, have forced the permanent members to vindicate themselves, to justify themselves every time they put a veto in the Security Council. And that has been done with the majority of the African states, the European states, the Asian states, the Latin American states. So we can strengthen the General Assembly, which is actually the most democratic body we are having on the international level. We can, and here I am with a couple of my colleagues here, we can build coalitions. I don't like the word coalitions of the willing so much, even though it's probably accurate. I would rather say we can build coalitions of the relevant, coalitions of those states who take issues seriously and look for common joint solutions. And only if we fail to cooperate, then we would fall altogether. But we still see that there is a common majority in the world that voted last year in the General Assembly of the United Nations for the Pact for the Future. All countries but one or two voted for that. We get a couple of international agreements on sustainability, on the high seas, on biodiversity. Now, that's not solving geopolitical conflicts, but I think we have to show that cooperation works wherever it works. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peters. Nous avons encore un peu de temps, donc peut-être que je pourrais prendre, disons, une ou deux questions de l'audience. Je vois que vous êtes assez nombreux. On a eu des propos déjà assez stimulants, donc n'hésitez pas à vous manifester si vous voulez poser une ou deux questions. En attendant, je vais utiliser le privilège du modérateur peut-être pour poser une première question de relance, mais faites signe dans l'assistance si vous voulez en poser une ensuite. If I correctly understand you, Mr. Peters, you're quite optimistic about the relevance of the UN and multilateral institutions. Am I correct?
Look, what I try to say is that there is no good alternative to multilateralism. So we have to make it work, even against the odds. And if we cannot reform the Security Council at this point, if we cannot overcome the blockade of the Security Council by great powers that have their conflicts, then we have to work on issue areas where we can make progress, just to keep it going. And maybe some of you think that biodiversity is not a great issue for cooperation, but I heard a lot yesterday here in panels about Morocco's interest in preserving a sustainable fishery in the Atlantic Ocean. So there you have biodiversity and preserving it. We spoke about how Africa, and it's not only Africa, is threatened by climate change. So maintaining multilateral cooperation on stemming climate change, speaking between Europe and Africa, Europe and Asia about climate justice is essential to keep up the spirit of multilateralism. Now, it may not be enough. Good, I accept that. But does that mean that I just sit back and watch TV? No, I would still go and work for multilateralism and multilateral solutions wherever I find relevant partners to do so.
Thank you very much. Does someone want to add something, reply, or add something on this point? You're all quite optimistic? Ms. Leifson?
So I just want to add to Volker's Okay, I just wanted to add to Volker's list of things that the UN is still generally regarded as competent to deliver services. So things like the UNICEF program, the UN development program and environmental programs. Obviously, those are quite dependent on the wealthiest countries contributing enough money for them to provide those services. But in general, those are less controversial than the war and peace questions. So I think at a minimum, I would still want to go up the ladder of value that Volker has identified. But at a minimum, we can still see that there's the specialized agencies, and the migration institution, the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, they can't solve these problems, but they certainly are playing a vital role in managing them, in keeping communication across states that have different interests going. So I do agree that we shouldn't just keep at this level of, simple, all these institutions are failing. Well, that's maybe the macro story, but you still have to go piece by piece and say what is still working and where do both rich and developing countries agree that these are valuable services? So.
Thank you very much. Ms. Vidden and Mr. Svensson.
No, I wanted to, I agree with that. I think that our only hope is to work with issues that are important for all of us. I mean, we have epidemics during COVID. There was a lot of things happening, and we will still have epidemics. We will have other issues that we need to solve, for our common humanity. And today, this is what we have. We have the UN system, and of course it's problematic. It has a lot of flaws, but that is what we have. So we need to maybe reform it. And when I will talk with my parents sometime, and especially my dad, and he will say, "Well, why don't the UN do something about what's happening in Palestine?" And I said, "Okay, well, the UN is a lot of states, different states, and if these states do not act or in a certain way, then nothing will happen." So,
exactly. Mr. Svensson?
Yeah, just to clarify, I don't actually have a problem with multilateralism, on the contrary. But I think when we have this block as we have today, regional organizations, these minilaterals, can actually provide a transition. So while you have this issue, and I agree with you, we should not stop working at the UN level, even if I'm slightly more skeptical. But I do think, and I think the African Union is a perfect example of a successful organization. ASEAN is another successful organization. And to be frank, I think European Union is a successful organization. We have had 70 years of peace. And 70 years of peace has never happened in European history before. So yes, we have our obstacles and challenges, but this is a combination of UN organizations, regional organizations, and minilaterals, where somebody would pull one day, hopefully another organization pull the next day. But the complexity, I think, will definitely be more apparent in the coming decades.
Thank you very much. Monsieur Ba et Monsieur...
Oui, très brièvement, pour dire, parce que je sais qu'on a, la plupart de l'audience sont des jeunes. Et je crois qu'il est très important de bien clarifier que ce ne sont pas les Nations Unies qui sont en cause, ce sont les pays membres. Et je pense qu'il faut vraiment faire la différence entre les Nations Unies qui sont un petit peu, si on voulait pousser la métaphore, de dire c'est un peu comme une assemblée générale de copropriétaires dans un immeuble. Ce n'est pas parce qu'il y a deux voisins ou l'un ou l'autre voisinage qui ne s'entendent pas et qui se battent à mort que la copropriété est responsable. Or, c'est bien de cela dont il s'agit. Et je pense qu'effectivement, il ne faut pas jeter le bébé avec l'eau du bain, comme on dit, et donc le système multilatéral tel qu'il a été échafaudé il y a 80 ans reste valide. Simplement, il faut le faire évoluer. Et il faut le faire évoluer de façon significative. J'ai évoqué tout à l'heure, effectivement, la nécessité de réformes profondes, notamment de faire en sorte que ce ne soit pas une institution exclusivement entre les mains des gouvernements. Il faut y associer la société civile, il faut y associer le secteur privé, il faut y associer la technologie. Aujourd'hui, les Nations Unies n'incarnent pas ce qu'il devrait être d'une maison commune de tous les acteurs qui ont une vision globale. Un autre point, je vais terminer, c'est quand même aussi de dire que, là encore, vis-à-vis d'une audience très jeune et d'une société civile mondiale, je ne sais pas ce que nous dirons à nos petits-enfants quand on devra expliquer qu'il y a des milliards de dollars aujourd'hui utilisés pour l'armement, alors qu'il y a encore des centaines de millions de personnes qui meurent de faim, qu'il n'y a, comme je disais tout à l'heure, encore pas une personne sur deux qui a l'électricité en Afrique. Et donc je pense que c'est là qu'il faut travailler, et je voudrais, d'une certaine façon, voir une mobilisation citoyenne et une mobilisation de la société civile auprès justement des Nations Unies et de ceux qui incarnent une vision globale, une vision partagée, une vision de paix et une vision de développement.
Merci beaucoup. Monsieur Titelman.
Non, très rapidement, en fait, c'est pour compléter mon propos sur le chaos tout à l'heure, parce que je pense que j'ai été incomplet. On parlait de ceux qui tirent profit du chaos, mais il y a aussi énormément de personnes qui ont intérêt à ce que leurs compétiteurs stratégiques soient affaiblis. Et c'est aussi ça qui va tirer un certain nombre de pays vers le bas. C'est que vous avez la Russie qui organise toute cette guerre hybride en organisant des attentats sur le sol européen, en détruisant des infrastructures critiques, en empêchant la communication, en réduisant le fait que la population suive nos institutions. Et vous avez la même chose ici, au Maroc. Qu'est-ce qui se passe avec le Front Polisario? Pourquoi est-ce que l'Algérie héberge des terroristes qui vont nuire au Maroc? Parce qu'ils veulent empêcher le développement libre, naturel du Maroc pour son enrichissement et pour le bien-être de la population. Et on ne peut pas déclarer la paix. Ça, c'est une difficulté. On peut déclarer la guerre, et quand vous avez votre voisin qui investit des dizaines de milliards, je crois que l'Algérie a investi 25 milliards de dollars pour son armement, c'est pas pour gérer les terroristes du Sahel. C'est bien parce qu'elle veut être dominante, voire constituer une menace pour ses voisins. Et ça, c'est une difficulté, c'est qu'avec toute la bonne volonté du monde, Les Marocains qui voudraient peut-être utiliser cet argent à bon escient pour développer leur population, eh bien, ils sont obligés de suivre cette course à l'armement qui leur est imposée par l'Algérie, avec le soutien, il faut le dire, de la Russie qui cherche à déstabiliser la zone. Vous l'avez peut-être vu au salon de Dubaï, il y a quelques semaines, vous avez les Russes qui ont un stand dans lequel ils vendent des armes, et notamment des drones de bombardement low cost, Gerbera, dans lequel ils présentaient sur leur stand une carte du Maroc avec les cibles. L'Algérie vend des drones, la Russie vend des drones à l'Algérie en disant déjà quelles sont les cibles légitimes, et d'ailleurs illégitimes entre parenthèses, pour attaquer le Maroc. Et ça c'est une grosse difficulté, c'est que la bonne volonté de certains pays n'est pas suffisante pour empêcher le chaos, et il faut s'armer aussi, et il faut être capable de répondre à la même hauteur que la menace et aux armes qu'ils utilisent, et aujourd'hui c'est la guerre hybride. Et la guerre hybride, malheureusement, nos bonnes manières et notre façon de travailler, qui aujourd'hui est légitime, permet le multilatéralisme, etc., et ben elle n'est plus suffisante pour empêcher ces gens-là de faire le mal.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que le mot de la fin va être pour vous, Monsieur Yakovlev. Il me semble que vous m'avez fait signe. J'avais une question à vous poser, mais je vais vous laisser quand même le mot de la fin.
C'est le mot de la fin. Alors, comme je vois dans la salle que nous avons la jeune génération, et vous êtes d'un pays, le Maroc, qui croit beaucoup en la paix et qui œuvre beaucoup pour la paix. Et moi, je viens d'un pays, en Europe, où nous avons cru à la paix pendant 70 ans. Alors j'ai vu un peu la guerre dans les Balkans, et maintenant la guerre est revenue en Europe. Et donc c'est un ancien militaire. Très souvent, j'entendais dans les discussions, qu'est-ce qu'on fait maintenant, des gens qui ne connaissent pas la guerre et qui disent nous avons cherché toutes les solutions, il ne nous reste plus que la guerre. Et donc mon dernier mot, c'est la guerre n'est jamais une solution à un problème. La guerre ne fait que changer le problème. Voilà. Mais vous venez d'un pays qui le comprend.
Merci beaucoup. Je pense que c'est un mot de la fin très juste, très approprié. Donc, je vous invite à vous joindre à moi pour remercier nos panélistes pour leur temps et pour la qualité de leurs interventions. Merci beaucoup, messieurs, dames. Bonne fin de MEDays 2025.